Under the sparkling chandelier of the ballroom, Jonathan extends a trembling hand to greet her, but freezes when the triplets, with eyes identical to his own, stare at him curiously. The entire room holds its breath before any word is spoken. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The pregnancy test trembled in Aaliyah Johnson's hands as she stood in the third-floor restroom of the Tech Fusion headquarters. 2 pink lines, unmistakable, undeniable. She closed her eyes, allowing the cool marble of the bathroom counter to steady her balance. 28 years old, 4 years as executive assistant to Jonathan Pierce, and now, this. Chicago stretched beyond the small window, autumn leaves swirling past glass skyscrapers along Michigan Avenue. Aaliyah studied her reflection, mocha skin, amber eyes currently wide with shock, natural hair styled in a professional twist. Her Brooks Brothers blazer and pencil skirt represented months of careful budgeting on an assistant's salary. "Breathe," she whispered to herself. "Just breathe." Her hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. The Vegas Technology Convention 6 weeks ago flashed through her mind. Champagne, Jonathan's suite overlooking the Strip, whispered promises in the dark. Their secret affair had developed gradually over the past 8 months, always carefully hidden from office gossip. Jonathan's engagement to Caroline Marshall, daughter of Tech Fusion's largest investor, made discretion imperative. Aaliyah tucked the test into her purse and practiced her expression in the mirror. Today could change everything. The board meeting had gone exceptionally well. Jonathan had been brilliant presenting the quarterly results. His mood would be celebratory, receptive. Perhaps this news, shocking as it was, might even be welcomed. In the elevator rising to the executive floor, Aaliyah rehearsed her words. Direct, but not demanding. Informative, but not pressuring. She smoothed her hair, straightened her blazer, and took a steadying breath as the doors opened to the hushed, carpeted hallway of the executive suite. "He's waiting for you," Jonathan's secretary said with a practiced smile, quite pleased about the board's reaction. Aaliyah nodded, her heart thundering against her ribs as she approached the heavy oak doors. She'd been in this office hundreds of times, taking notes, organizing meetings, handling crises. Today felt different. Today she wasn't entering as his assistant. Jonathan Pierce stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouetted against the Chicago skyline, phone pressed to his ear. At 37, he embodied corporate success. Tall, trim, with piercing green eyes and the confident posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He turned as she entered, a smile spreading across his face. "There she is!" he exclaimed, ending his call. "The woman behind the man. The board was impressed with those projection models you helped prepare. Marshall actually said he's never seen clearer data visualization." "I'm glad," Aaliyah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You presented them perfectly." Jonathan crossed to the bar cart in the corner, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal tumblers. "A celebration is in order. The Marshall acquisition is practically guaranteed now." He extended a glass toward her. Aaliyah didn't move to take it. "Something wrong?" Jonathan asked, his smile faltering slightly. "I can't drink this," she said quietly. "Since when?" "This is the 18-year Macallan." His eyebrow raised in mild amusement. "Since I'm pregnant, Jonathan." The words hung in the air between them. Jonathan's expression froze, the smile still in place, but his eyes suddenly sharp, calculating. He set both glasses down carefully on his mahogany desk. "Pregnant?" he repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "That's unexpected. Are you certain?" "Just confirmed it." "And you're sure it's—" He paused, eyes narrowing. "You're sure it's mine?" The question stung like a slap. "There hasn't been anyone else, Jonathan. You know that." Something shifted in his expression then. The shocked businessman disappeared, replaced by something colder, more tactical. He circled his desk slowly, like a predator assessing its options. "This is a disaster, Aaliyah. An absolute disaster. I'm weeks away from marrying Caroline Marshall. Do you understand what that means for the company? For me? I'm not asking you to cancel your wedding, Aaliyah said, maintaining her composure through sheer will. I just thought you should know. No? Jonathan's voice rose sharply. And what exactly do you expect me to do with this information? He moved closer, his height suddenly intimidating. What's your angle here? A promotion? Money? I don't have an angle. This is our reality now. Jonathan laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Our reality? There is no our here, Aaliyah. There never was. What followed was the most excruciating hour of Aaliyah's life. Jonathan systematically dismantled her, not with shouting or obvious cruelty, but with clinical precision. He paced the office, outlining her inadequacies one by one. Let's be honest about who you are, he said, voice deceptively conversational. State university education, mediocre at best, no strategic thinking capabilities. You organize schedules and take notes, Aaliyah. You're an assistant, a glorified secretary who happens to be good with Excel. Aaliyah stood perfectly still, refusing to show how each word cut through her. That's not fair. I've contributed significantly to… To what? Jonathan interrupted. Filing my expense reports correctly? Getting my coffee order right? Please. He leaned against his desk, studying her with detached curiosity. Did you actually think this pregnancy would elevate you somehow? Make you special? I didn't come here with expectations, Jonathan. I came with information you deserved to know. Information, he repeated mockingly. Well, here's some information for you. You are common, Aaliyah, unremarkable, without vision or exceptional talent. You're a footnote in other people's success stories. His words echoed in the spacious office, each one landing like a physical blow. It was fun for a while, Jonathan continued, his tone softening to something almost pitying. But you can't seriously believe someone like me would build a future with someone like you. Someone like me, Aaliyah repeated quietly. Exactly. Jonathan straightened his already perfect tie. You're boring, Aaliyah. Boring people don't change the world. They don't build empires. They take notes for those who do. 15 days later, on a rainy Friday afternoon, Aaliyah was summoned to Human Resources. The small, windowless office felt airless as she signed termination papers, her hands surprisingly steady. Organizational restructuring was the official term used, the HR representative avoiding eye contact. The severance package was minimal, 2 weeks' pay. Health insurance would terminate in 30 days. Her employee badge was deactivated before she reached the elevator. The security guard watched impassively as she carried a small box of personal items across the marble lobby. Outside, Chicago's autumn rain soaked through her blazer as she waited for the bus, her box growing damp in her arms. In her small Bronzeville apartment that evening, Aaliyah faced her first night of unemployment surrounded by mounting bills, a positive pregnancy test, and the deafening silence of her phone. She'd applied to 6 jobs online already, forcing herself to focus on practicalities rather than the hollow feeling in her chest. 3 weeks later, at her first prenatal appointment in a crowded clinic, the doctor delivered news that explained her intense symptoms. Ms. Johnson, the doctor said, adjusting the ultrasound monitor, I'm seeing multiple heartbeats here. You're carrying triplets. Aaliyah stared at the screen, at 3 tiny fluttering pulses, and felt the world tilt beneath her. The following months became a descent into a private hell. No company wanted to hire a visibly pregnant woman for executive positions, regardless of her qualifications. Aaliyah accepted whatever work she could find: temporary data entry, phone customer service, anything that would generate income while her body changed. Her savings disappeared with alarming speed. The apartment was downgraded to a tiny studio. Meals became increasingly sparse. On a particularly cold February evening, while organizing grocery coupons at her kitchen table, Aaliyah glanced up at her small television. Jonathan Pierce's face filled the screen, being interviewed on CNBC about disruptive innovation and visionary leadership. He looked polished, confident, his green eyes animated as he described TechFusion's bright future. "Our success comes from recognizing and developing exceptional talent," he was saying. "Mediocrity has no place in the innovation economy." Aaliyah felt movement in her swollen belly, 3 distinct patterns, already individual, already fighters. She placed her hands protectively over them, sudden clarity washing over her like a wave. "He's wrong," she whispered to her unborn children. "About everything. About me. And someday, I'll make sure he knows exactly how wrong he was." The next morning, Aaliyah Johnson created a detailed 5-year plan in her worn notebook. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about complete reinvention, about transforming every cruel word into fuel for a rise that no one, especially Jonathan Pierce, could ignore. That cold February night, as she wrote her meticulous plan by candlelight to save on electricity, Aaliyah had no way of knowing that in 15 years she would be the one on CNBC, announcing the acquisition of the company owned by the man who had dismissed her as irrelevant. The next morning, Aaliyah Johnson pulled herself out of bed at 5:30, the pain in her lower back a constant companion now as she entered her 4th month of pregnancy. The notebook containing her 5-year plan lay open on the small kitchen table, a beacon of determination in her increasingly precarious world. She allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to sip lukewarm tea before beginning the day's job search. "One application at a time," she whispered, opening her laptop, a refurbished model that frequently overheated. The screen illuminated her tired face as she scrolled through listings that once would have been beneath her consideration. By 9 o'clock, she had submitted applications for 5 administrative positions, carefully omitting her pregnancy from every cover letter. Her phone remained silent except for an automated rejection from yesterday's interview, the 3rd this week. The interviewer's uncomfortable glance at her growing midsection had told her everything before she'd even sat down. "Position requires someone with total availability," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. Aaliyah's apartment buzzer rang unexpectedly. Her landlord stood at the door, his expression already communicating the news before he spoke. "Ms. Johnson, I've been patient, but you're now 6 weeks behind on rent. Mr. Gaines, I just need a little more time. I have several promising interviews lined up." His eyes flickered briefly to her midsection. "I've got 3 families waiting for units. Can't run a charity here." 2 days later, Aaliyah stood in the doorway of a studio apartment in a significantly worse neighborhood in Bronzeville. The building's hallway smelled of mildew and cigarettes, and distant shouting echoed through thin walls. The unit itself was barely 400 square feet, a far cry from her previous 1-bedroom with the small office nook where she'd once drafted reports for Jonathan. "It ain't much," said the building manager, jingling his keys impatiently, "but it's all you'll find for that price without a credit check." As she signed the month-to-month lease, an older tenant passing by in the hallway noticed her pregnant state. "You moving in alone, honey?" Aaliyah nodded. "Lock your door at night. We had 3 break-ins last month." That evening, Aaliyah arranged her remaining possessions in the tiny space. She'd sold her comfortable couch and dining set, keeping only her bed, a small desk, and essential kitchenware. Her hand unconsciously moved to her stomach as the triplets stirred. "We'll be okay," she promised them. "This is temporary." Her first day as a telemarketing operator came 3 days later. In a cramped call center with 30 other desperate workers, Aaliyah sat in an uncomfortable chair as her supervisor explained the strict metrics. "Bathroom breaks are limited to 5 minutes, twice per shift," the woman said without looking up from her clipboard. "Call times should average under 3 minutes. Commission is based on conversions." For 8 hours, Aaliyah read from scripts selling credit card protection services, enduring hang-ups, insults, and occasional verbal abuse. Her back screamed in protest at the unyielding chair. By the end of her shift, she had made exactly $27 in commission. The calendar on her wall marked prenatal appointments in red and bill due dates in black. The black dates significantly outnumbered the red. At night, Aaliyah took the bus across town to her second job, office cleaning at a downtown corporate building. On her knees in corporate bathrooms at 3 in the morning, her pregnant belly making movement increasingly difficult, she scrubbed toilets used by executives who earned in an hour what she now made in a week. One night, pushing her cleaning cart down a hushed corridor, she froze at the sight of a familiar logo on a door. Tech Fusion had leased the entire 12th floor. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the door, stepping into the satellite office of the company that had once been her workplace. Methodically, she emptied trash bins, wiped down surfaces, and vacuumed plush carpeting. At an assistant's desk, a corporate magazine lay open, Jonathan's face staring up from a full-page feature. Pierce leads Tech Fusion to record quarter. Aaliyah stared at his confident smile, the same smile he'd flashed at her across conference tables, in hotel rooms, in the moments before he'd systematically destroyed her sense of worth. One day, she whispered to the empty office, my face will be in these magazines too. At her 20-week checkup in a crowded public clinic, Aaliyah waited 3 hours before seeing a doctor. The ultrasound revealed 3 healthy developing boys, but the physician's brow furrowed as he reviewed her chart. Your blood pressure is concerning, Ms. Johnson, and you're underweight for a triplet pregnancy. You need more calories and rest. Aaliyah nearly laughed at the suggestion of rest. Between telemarketing days and cleaning nights, with 4 hours of data entry work squeezed in between, rest had become a foreign concept. I'll try to eat more, she said, knowing her food budget was already stretched to breaking. The following week, when her telemarketing supervisor reprimanded her for taking too long in the bathroom, morning sickness persisted well into her second trimester with 3 babies pressing against her organs. Aaliyah found herself standing in line at a food bank for the first time. The shame burned in her chest as volunteers gave her sympathetic looks, one older woman patting her hand as she handed over a bag of canned goods. First baby? The volunteer asked kindly. Triplets, Aaliyah replied. The woman's eyes widened. Lord have mercy. The father helping out? Aaliyah looked away. There is no father. Her carefully constructed budget collapsed entirely in her 6th month when severe anemia landed her in the emergency room. For 6 hours, she sat in a crowded public hospital waiting area, lightheaded and terrified for her babies. When finally admitted, the doctor administered iron infusions and lectured her about prenatal care. You need to prioritize these babies, he said sternly. Where is your support system? I'm their support system, Aaliyah replied. That night, in her tiny apartment, she created an impossible schedule on a piece of paper taped to her wall. Telemarketing reduced to part-time, cleaning limited to 3 nights, 4 hours of sleep divided into strategic naps, meals planned to the penny, 5 minutes daily allocated to crying if needed. Every remaining moment dedicated to either earning money or learning marketable skills through free online tutorials. On a cold January morning, with her delivery date approaching, Aaliyah's ancient tablet loaded a news page featuring photos from Jonathan and Caroline's lavish wedding at the Marshall family estate. The 5-tier cake alone likely cost more than her annual income. In the photos, Jonathan beamed, looking every bit the successful CEO marrying into business royalty. Aaliyah ate microwaved ramen noodles while studying the images, her free hand resting on her enormous belly. She no longer felt the sharp pain of betrayal. Exhaustion had dulled all emotions except determination. The contrast between their lives had become so extreme it seemed almost comical. The triplets arrived 2 weeks early after a terrifying 30-hour labor. Alone in the delivery room except for rotating hospital staff, Aaliyah gripped the hand of a kind nurse she'd met only hours before as she brought her sons into the world. Elijah, she whispered as the first tiny boy was placed briefly on her chest before being rushed to NICU. Ethan, as the second arrived. Elliot, as the third completed the trio. The boys remained in neonatal intensive care for 11 days. each day a marathon of pumping breast milk, learning preemie care techniques from nurses, and fighting with her insurance company over coverage limits. When she finally brought them home, 3 impossibly small bundles to her studio apartment, the true magnitude of her situation hit with full force. That first night alone with the triplets became a blur of feeding, changing, soothing, and silent tears. When all 3 somehow cried simultaneously at 3 in the morning, Aaliyah sat on the floor among them, her own sobs joining theirs. "I can't do this," she whispered into the darkness. Then, taking a deep breath, "No, I can do this. I have to do this." She developed systems with military precision, a feeding schedule tracked in a notebook, diaper-changing stations optimized for efficiency, sleep captured in 20-minute increments when the stars aligned and all 3 boys slept simultaneously. During those precious quiet moments, balanced precariously between exhaustion and determination, Aaliyah studied. Her laptop propped against her knees, a programming textbook balanced on one arm, often with a baby sleeping against her chest, she absorbed information with fierce intensity. HTML, CSS, SQL, Python, languages that promised a future beyond cleaning offices and selling credit card protection. When Elijah developed a high fever at 3 months old, Aaliyah spent a terrifying night in a public emergency room, the other 2 babies bundled alongside them in their stroller. The overworked doctor barely looked at them before prescribing antibiotics, while Aaliyah silently calculated how the medication would impact her already strained budget. By the time the boys reached 6 months, Aaliyah had developed a tolerance for exhaustion that bordered on superhuman. She'd secured a position as a remote data entry clerk, working during the baby's naps and late into the night. The pay was minimal, but she could work from home, eliminating childcare costs she couldn't possibly afford. Her daily life became an endless cycle of caring for the triplets, working, studying, and maintaining her increasingly detailed 5-year plan. Each small step forward, completing an online certificate, mastering a new programming concept, earning an extra $50, was meticulously documented. In the grocery store 8 months after the births, Aaliyah turned a corner and came face to face with Maria, her former colleague from Tech Fusion. The triplets were strapped to her in an elaborate carrier system she'd designed herself. "Aaliyah? Oh my God." Maria's eyes widened at the sight of 3 babies. "When you disappeared, I had no idea. Are these all yours?" "Yes," Aaliyah replied simply, acutely aware of her discount store clothing and the dark circles under her eyes. "They're beautiful," Maria said, then lowered her voice. "Have you heard about Jonathan? He's absolutely killing it. Just closed a $100 million deal with European investors. Everyone's saying he'll be the youngest CEO to take a company public in Chicago history." "That's nice," Aaliyah said neutrally. Maria glanced at the triplets again. "They're really gorgeous. Their father must be so proud." "There is no father," Aaliyah stated flatly. After Maria left, promising to catch up sometime with obvious insincerity, Aaliyah found herself in the store's parking lot, suddenly overcome. She pulled out her phone and searched Jonathan's name, finding dozens of recent articles praising his business acumen and visionary leadership. That night, after putting the boys to sleep in their second-hand cribs, Aaliyah updated her 5-year plan, adding more ambitious goals, extending her timeline but raising the stakes. She was no longer planning merely to survive. She was plotting a rise so spectacular that one day, Jonathan Pierce would be forced to acknowledge the enormity of his mistake. While updating her plan by the light of a cheap lamp, Aaliyah didn't realize that her experimental algorithm, developed in the few free hours between work and motherhood, would become the seed of a technological revolution that would one day put her face to face with Jonathan under circumstances he could never predict. The experimental algorithm flickered on Aaliyah's cracked laptop screen as she refreshed the job listings page for the 5th time that morning. The triplets, now 13 months old, napped in synchronized harmony, a rare miracle she'd learned to exploit for maximum productivity. Her 5-year plan, taped to the wall and annotated with colored markers, had begun to accumulate check marks beside small victories. Complete Python certification, master SQL basics, apply to 100 data positions. The email notification startled her. Subject line, interview request, data analyst position. Sender, Sandra Williams, CEO, Clear Insight Software Solutions. Aaliyah read the message 3 times, heart accelerating. A small startup specializing in customer behavior analytics wanted to interview her. A real analyst position, not data entry, not customer service. The salary mentioned would double her current income. 2 days later, Aaliyah pushed the unwieldy triple stroller through Brooklyn's spring drizzle toward the Clear Insight office. She'd spent precious dollars on printing resumes on quality paper and dry cleaning her only interview-appropriate outfit, a navy blazer and skirt combination that had grown loose on her frame. The office occupied half a floor in a converted warehouse building. As Aaliyah maneuvered the stroller through the door, a woman with close-cropped silver hair and rich brown skin looked up from a desk. "You must be Aaliyah Johnson," she said, rising. "I'm Sandra Williams." "Yes, I apologize for bringing them," Aaliyah gestured to the triplets. "My childcare fell through at the last minute, and I didn't want to reschedule." Sandra's eyes softened as she approached the stroller. "3 of them? Identical?" "Yes. Elijah, Ethan, and Elliot. They're 13 months. Sandra studied Aaliyah with newfound interest. "And you taught yourself programming while raising triplets alone?" "Mostly between 2 and 5 in the morning," Aaliyah admitted, gently rocking the stroller with her foot as Elliot began to stir. The interview proceeded with Aaliyah answering technical questions while distributing Cheerios to keep the boys occupied. When Elliot fussed, she lifted him to her hip without breaking her explanation of database normalization principles. "Your technical knowledge is impressive for someone self-taught," Sandra remarked. "But frankly, what's more impressive is doing all this while raising 3 babies on your own. That demonstrates problem-solving skills beyond what any certification can prove." As Sandra explained the position, analyzing customer data patterns for small retail clients, Aaliyah felt a fragile hope blossoming. The role would be remote, with flexible hours. "I need someone who can think differently," Sandra concluded. "Someone who sees patterns others miss. Your sample analysis showed that capacity." "Thank you," Aaliyah said, then hesitated. "May I ask why you're considering me? My resume has gaps, and I have no formal experience as an analyst." Sandra's expression turned reflective. 20 years ago, I was a single mother with twins trying to break into tech. Nobody would take a chance on me." She gestured around the modest office. "Now I own this company, and I believe in paying forward the opportunity I eventually received." 1 week later, Aaliyah began her new job as a junior data analyst for Clear Insight Software Solutions. Her first paycheck, modest by industry standards but a fortune compared to data entry, allowed her to purchase a better laptop and a small desk that fit beside her bed. Her new routine was brutal but purposeful. The boys went to sleep at 8. Aaliyah worked from 8:30 until midnight, slept until 3, then worked again until the triplets woke at 6. During daylight hours, she balanced childcare with answering urgent emails, often typing one-handed while holding a baby or preparing meals. The tiny apartment transformed into a combination nursery and data lab. Charts and graphs shared wall space with alphabet posters. Her desk accumulated both data printouts and teething toys. On particularly challenging days, she would work with Elijah sleeping against her chest, Ethan in a playpen beside her, and Elliot exploring the limited floor space of their studio apartment. Despite the exhaustion, Aaliyah thrived on the intellectual challenge. Her analysis consistently identified patterns that helped Clear Insight's clients optimize their marketing strategies. Sandra's mentorship proved invaluable. The older woman recognized Aaliyah's potential and pushed her to develop it further. As summer transitioned to fall, distinct personalities emerged in the triplets. Elijah responded intensely to music, quieting immediately when Aaliyah played classical compositions during her work sessions. Ethan showed uncanny awareness of patterns, methodically arranging his blocks by color and size. Elliot, the most verbal, already attempted complex sentences, chattering constantly as he explored their small home. "They're extraordinary," Sandra remarked during a rare in-person meeting where Aaliyah had brought the boys. "You're raising 3 remarkable human beings while redefining your career. Don't ever forget what that represents." On a crisp October evening, with the triplets finally asleep, Aaliyah received an urgent message from Sandra. "Major crisis with Meridian Retail. They're threatening to cancel their contract over discrepancies in last quarter's analysis. All hands emergency meeting." The Meridian account represented 30% of Clear Insight's revenue. Losing it would devastate the small company. Aaliyah joined the video call, camera off to hide her makeshift home office. The team looked panicked as they reviewed Meridian's complaint. The predictive customer behavior model had shown unexpected deviations, causing the client to doubt its accuracy. "We need to review all the data tonight," Sandra announced. "Our meeting with Meridian's board is at 9 tomorrow morning." After the call, Aaliyah pulled up all relevant datasets, searching for the source of the discrepancy. The triplets remained mercifully asleep as she worked through the night, cups of coffee accumulating beside her keyboard. At 2 in the morning, Elliot woke crying. Aaliyah lifted him to her lap, bouncing him gently while continuing to scroll through columns of numbers. At 4:17 in the morning, as she patted Elliot back to sleep, a pattern suddenly emerged, subtle but significant. The customer behavior deviation coincided perfectly with an unannounced competitor's promotion that had temporarily distorted the market. The algorithm hadn't failed. It had detected an external factor the client hadn't disclosed. Hands shaking with exhaustion and excitement, Aaliyah compiled a comprehensive analysis, complete with visualizations demonstrating the correlation. She sent the report at 4:45, then collapsed beside her sleeping sons for a brief rest before they would wake for the day. Her phone rang at 7:30. Sandra's voice crackled with emotion. "Aaliyah, how did you see this? We've all been looking at the same data for hours." "I noticed the deviation had a weekly pattern that matched something external," Aaliyah explained, voice rough from lack of sleep. "Once I overlaid their competitor's promotion calendar, it was clear." "You just saved our company," Sandra said simply. "The report is brilliant. Meridian's CEO already called me. They're not just keeping the contract, they're expanding it." 2 weeks later, Aaliyah received an email that changed everything. "Effective immediately, you are promoted to Senior Data Analyst with a 40% salary increase. Additionally, please accept the enclosed bonus as recognition for saving the Meridian account." The bonus, larger than any amount Aaliyah had seen in her account since leaving Tech Fusion, enabled a transformation. Within a month, she moved the family to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood. The boys finally had their own room with proper cribs instead of the second-hand pack-and-plays they'd outgrown. That first night in the new apartment, after settling the triplets in their room, Aaliyah stood in the small but clean living area, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of space. A separate bedroom for the boys, a kitchen with countertops, windows that faced trees instead of an alley. For the first time in nearly 2 years, she allowed herself to cry. Not from despair, but from the tentative relief of forward momentum. As winter settled over the city, Aaliyah established a more sustainable routine. Her higher salary allowed for occasional childcare help, a neighborhood teenager who watched the boys for 4 hours each Saturday, giving Aaliyah precious time to work, uninterrupted. The triplets thrived in their new environment, reaching developmental milestones with impressive speed. On a snowy December afternoon, Aaliyah pushed her grocery cart through the local supermarket, the triplets securely fastened in their seats, when a familiar voice called her name. "Aaliyah? Aaliyah Johnson?" She turned to see David Chen, a former Tech Fusion marketing director who had occasionally worked with Jonathan. "I thought that was you," he said, eyes widening at the sight of the triplets. "Wow, You've been busy. They're beautiful." "Thank you," Aaliyah replied, suddenly conscious of her practical winter coat and sensible boots, a far cry from her former professional wardrobe. "Are you still in the corporate world?" David asked, clearly struggling to reconcile the polished executive assistant he remembered with the mother of triplets before him. "I'm a senior data analyst now," she answered, a quiet pride in her voice, "for a software solutions company." "That's great." David nodded, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Have you heard about Jonathan? He's absolutely crushing it. Just closed that European expansion deal. The industry press is calling him a visionary." Aaliyah kept her expression neutral. "I haven't followed Tech Fusion news." David glanced at the triplets again. "They're gorgeous kids. Their father must be proud." "There is no father," Aaliyah stated firmly. "It's just us." After an awkward goodbye, Aaliyah continued shopping, David's words echoing in her mind. That evening, after putting the boys to bed, she found herself searching Jonathan Pierce online for the first time in months. His face appeared in numerous recent articles. Tech innovator reshaping industry. Pierce leads Tech Fusion to record growth. In every photo, he looked exactly as she remembered. Confident, polished, successful. A new profile in Business Insider mentioned his perfect family life with Caroline and their recent purchase of a lakefront mansion. Staring at his image on her screen, Aaliyah felt the familiar twist of anger and determination. She opened her 5-year plan document, reviewing her progress and adding more ambitious goals. No longer content with stability, she began mapping a trajectory that would eventually place her among the industry's elite. While updating her plan that night, pen moving decisively across paper, Aaliyah didn't realize that her experimental algorithm, developed in the precious few hours between work and motherhood, would become the seed of a technological revolution that would one day put her face to face with Jonathan under circumstances he could never predict. While updating her plan that night, Aaliyah paused to look at the 3 sleeping toddlers. 4 years had passed since that life-altering moment in the executive bathroom of Tech Fusion, and her world had transformed completely. The junior analyst position at Clear Insight had evolved into something much more significant. She was now 32, a respected senior analyst whose innovative approaches had saved and expanded multiple client relationships. Closing her laptop, Aaliyah padded quietly to the bedroom doorway where Elijah, Ethan, and Elliot, now 4 years old, slept peacefully. Their room, modest but thoughtfully arranged, featured educational posters, small bookshelves overflowing with library books, and a second-hand keyboard Elijah had received for his birthday. Each boy had developed distinct personalities that sometimes amazed Aaliyah with their clarity. Early morning sunlight filtered through the curtains as Aaliyah prepared breakfast, checking her phone for overnight emails. The triplets emerged from their room in matching pajamas, inherited personalities immediately evident. Elijah humming a complex melody, Ethan methodically arranging his silverware at perfect right angles, Elliot already launching into a detailed account of his dream. "Mommy, I dreamed about a robot that could think like people," Elliot explained, spreading peanut butter on his toast with careful precision unusual for a 4-year-old. "That's called artificial intelligence," Ethan corrected, adjusting his glasses, a recent addition he wore with scholarly pride. "Like Mommy's special computer program." Aaliyah smiled, still amazed by their vocabulary and conceptual understanding. "That's right, and we need to hurry if we're going to get you to Little Explorers on time." The subsidized preschool program had been a godsend, allowing Aaliyah to work more consistent hours while the boys received quality early education. During drop-off, she watched with quiet pride as each boy demonstrated his unique gifts. Elijah immediately gravitated toward the classroom piano, his small fingers finding chords that surprised even the music teacher. "He has perfect pitch," the teacher had informed Aaliyah during the last parent conference. "It's extremely rare, especially at his age." Ethan settled at the puzzle station, bypassing the age-appropriate options for a 100-piece solar system puzzle he'd been systematically completing throughout the week. His teacher had recently suggested having him evaluated for the gifted program. Elliot, meanwhile, engaged a teacher's aide in an elaborate conversation about dinosaur extinction theories, his vocabulary and sentence structure years beyond his chronological age. "They're quite extraordinary," the lead teacher commented as Aaliyah prepared to leave. "You must be very proud." "I am," Aaliyah replied, the familiar mixture of pride and exhaustion coloring her voice. "They're my whole world." Back at her apartment, converted into a home office during school hours, Aaliyah opened her laptop to continue developing her side project, an algorithm for behavioral prediction far more sophisticated than anything Clear Insight currently employed. The program represented countless late nights and early mornings, thousands of lines of code written during stolen moments between motherhood and official work responsibilities. Her phone interrupted her concentration. Sandra's name flashed on the screen. "We've lost Cloud Retail and Market Sync in the same week," Sandra said without preamble, her voice tight with stress. "The board is meeting this afternoon. We need something game-changing or we're looking at significant downsizing." Aaliyah's stomach tightened. Clear Insight employed only 23 people. Downsizing meant layoffs, potentially including her position. With 3 children depending solely on her income, unemployment wasn't an option. After ending the call, Aaliyah stared at her screen where the experimental algorithm pulsed with potential. She'd been developing it secretly, planning eventually to launch her own venture when it was fully refined. The program was her intellectual lifeline, her hedge against future uncertainty, her ticket beyond employment to ownership. Was she ready to risk exposing it prematurely? That evening, after bedtime stories and tucking 3 drowsy boys into bed, Aaliyah sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by printouts of her algorithm's test results. The data was compelling. Early trials showed predictive accuracy rates that exceeded industry standards by significant margins. But it remained untested at scale, vulnerable to criticism, and potentially revealing flaws she hadn't yet identified. The next morning, Aaliyah arrived at Clear Insight's offices clutching a flash drive and a folder of documentation, her heart racing. The conference room held the company's entire leadership team, faces drawn with concern as they discussed the financial implications of losing 2 major clients. "We need something revolutionary," James from Business Development was saying. "Our current offering is being outpaced by competitors with deeper pockets." Aaliyah cleared her throat. "I might have something that could work." All eyes turned toward her. "It's experimental," she continued, "but the preliminary results are promising." Sandra nodded encouragingly. "Show us." For the next 30 minutes, Aaliyah presented her algorithm, explaining how it integrated multiple data streams to predict consumer behavior with unprecedented accuracy. The room's atmosphere shifted from skepticism to cautious interest as she walked through case studies using anonymized data from their existing clients. "This could transform our entire service offering," Sandra said finally. "How long have you been developing this?" "About 2 years," Aaliyah admitted. "Nights, weekends, whenever the boys are asleep." "And you're willing to implement it for Vertex Logic?" Sandra asked, referencing their largest remaining client, who had recently expressed dissatisfaction with their current analytics. "Yes," Aaliyah said firmly, "I believe in this technology." 2 weeks later, Aaliyah found herself in Vertex Logic's gleaming corporate headquarters, presenting her algorithm to their executive team. The stakes couldn't be higher. Not only Clear Insight's future, but her personal gamble on revealing her innovation prematurely. The existing model showed a conversion rate of approximately 8%, she explained, advancing to a slide showing a complex visualization. "Our new predictive model indicates potential conversion rates of 13 to 15% by targeting previously unrecognized behavioral patterns." The executives exchanged skeptical glances. "Those are ambitious claims, Ms. Johnson," Vertex Logic's CEO remarked. What makes your model so different from what we're currently using? Aaliyah took a deep breath. Traditional models analyze obvious patterns. My algorithm identifies subtle correlations that humans typically miss, micro-behaviors that actually predict purchasing decisions more accurately than demographic data. She demonstrated the system using their actual customer data, highlighting patterns that had been invisible in their previous analytics. As concrete examples accumulated, skepticism gave way to fascination. "This is remarkable," the CEO admitted finally. "How did your company develop this without anyone in the industry hearing about it?" Aaliyah exchanged a quick glance with Sandra before answering truthfully. "It's actually my personal project. I developed it independently while working at Clear Insight." The room fell silent. "You created this yourself?" the CEO asked incredulously. "While working full-time?" "And raising triplets," Sandra added proudly. The meeting concluded with Vertex Logic not only retaining Clear Insight's services, but doubling their contract value to implement Aaliyah's algorithm across all their customer channels. As they left the building, Sandra turned to Aaliyah with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just save our company," she said. "You've transformed it." 3 months later, Aaliyah stood at the back of a sparsely filled conference room at the National Retail Analytics Convention, preparing to present her findings in a secondary panel titled Emerging Approaches in Consumer Prediction. Her session had drawn only about 20 attendees, mostly junior analysts from mid-sized companies. As she organized her notes, a commotion in the main hallway drew attention. Through the doorway, she glimpsed a crowd forming around someone entering the convention center's grand ballroom. The circle parted momentarily, revealing Jonathan Pierce at its center, shaking hands and smiling confidently as admirers clustered around him. He looked exactly as she remembered, impeccably dressed in what was undoubtedly a custom suit, his posture radiating the easy confidence of someone accustomed to admiration. Jonathan was clearly heading to deliver the convention's keynote address, his name emblazoned on signs throughout the venue. "The Future of Tech, Visionary Insights with Jonathan Pierce." For a breathless moment, their eyes nearly met across the crowded hallway. Aaliyah froze, unsure whether to retreat further into her room or stand her ground. But Jonathan's gaze swept past her without recognition, continuing his triumphant procession toward the main stage. The ache of invisibility lasted only seconds before transforming into steely resolve. Aaliyah straightened her shoulders and returned to preparing her presentation. Her audience might be small today, but her ideas were powerful. Her time would come. After delivering her presentation to enthusiastic response from the small group, Aaliyah was approached by a man in an impeccable suit who had slipped in halfway through. "Ms. Johnson, Michael Brannigan, Venture Capital Partners," he said, extending his hand. "Your algorithm has extraordinary potential beyond retail applications. Have you considered seeking investment to develop it further?" That evening in her hotel room, Aaliyah conducted a video call with the triplets, who were staying with Sandra for the weekend. As they chattered excitedly about their day, she simultaneously responded to emails from 3 different investment groups, all interested in discussing her technology further. "Mommy has big news," she told the boys as they settled down. "Some important people want to help me start my own company." "Your own company?" Ethan asked, eyes widening behind his glasses. "Like you're the boss?" "Potentially, yes." "Will you be the CEO?" Elliot asked, clearly familiar with the term. "Maybe someday." Elijah, typically more focused on emotions than titles, asked the most important question. "Are you happy, Mommy?" Aaliyah smiled genuinely. "Yes, baby. Mommy is very happy." 4 weeks later, seated in a sleek conference room overlooking Manhattan, Aaliyah received the offer that would change everything. "We're prepared to offer $500,000 in seed funding for you to establish your own company based on your predictive algorithm technology." As she signed the initial funding documents in the small co-working office in Brooklyn, Aaliyah couldn't imagine that in just 8 years her Horizon innovations would be valued at more than $300 million, or that her algorithms would revolutionize the same industry that Jonathan Pierce believed he dominated. The seed funding transformed the experimental algorithm from a personal project into a legitimate business venture overnight. Aaliyah stood in the small Brooklyn co-working space she'd rented with part of the investment, watching as her logo was installed on the frosted glass door. Horizon Innovations. The name represented everything she'd been working toward, looking beyond immediate limitations toward boundless possibility. "Mom, is this where you work now?" asked Elliot, now 8 years old, his articulate speech pattern fully formed as he examined the modest office space. "It is," Aaliyah replied, watching as Elijah tested the acoustics of the room by humming softly in different corners, while Ethan immediately began calculating the square footage in his head. "It's smaller than I expected for a CEO's office," Ethan remarked, pushing his glasses up his nose. Aaliyah smiled. "Most great companies start small, remember?" Apple began in a garage. 4 years had transformed both her life and the triplets. The boys now attended Patterson Academy, a prestigious private school that had offered them partial scholarships after their exceptional test scores caught the administration's attention. Though tuition payments still stretched Aaliyah's budget, the educational opportunity was worth every sacrifice. The first 6 months of Horizon Innovations operated on controlled chaos. Aaliyah hired 2 junior developers and a part-time administrative assistant, converting the algorithm into a scalable platform that could be customized for various industries. Their workspace evolved from a single desk to occupying half the co-working floor, whiteboards covered in code filling every available wall. On a crisp autumn evening, Aaliyah sat surrounded by her small team, takeout containers scattered across their conference table as they awaited word from their first major potential client, a mid-sized retail chain that had been losing market share to online competitors. "They should have called by now," muttered Dev, her lead programmer, checking his watch for the 5th time. The phone rang, startling everyone. Aaliyah answered, her voice carefully controlled despite her racing heart. "Ms. Johnson, this is Richard Whitman from Carlton Retail. We've reviewed your proposal and—" He paused dramatically. "We'd like to implement your predictive platform across all 63 of our locations." After ending the call, Aaliyah stood frozen for a moment before breaking into a rare, unrestrained smile. They said yes. Full implementation, 12-month contract. The small office erupted in cheers. Champagne appeared from someone's desk drawer, plastic cups were distributed, and Aaliyah found herself making an impromptu toast. "To Horizon's first major client, and to Horizons we haven't yet imagined." Later that night, after tucking the boys into bed in their apartment, still modest but in a significantly better neighborhood than their first home, Aaliyah opened the leather-bound journal she'd purchased with her first paycheck as CEO. Inside, she methodically documented each milestone achieved. October 12th, signed Carlton Retail. First 6-figure contract. Annual projected revenue now $340,000. She flipped back through earlier entries, each representing a hard-won victory. August 3rd, secured office space in Brooklyn Innovation Center. August 15th, hired first employees. September 7th, filed provisional patent for behavioral prediction algorithm. Beneath these business achievements, a separate section tracked the boys' milestones. Ethan, State Math Championship 3rd place, advanced placement in science. Elijah, selected for Youth Symphony, first original composition performed. Elliot, debate team captain, youngest in school history. These dual tracks of success, professional and maternal, represented Aaliyah's complete defiance of Jonathan's cruel dismissal. Every night spent coding while the boys slept, every parent-teacher conference attended between client meetings, every bedtime story read despite exhaustion, all stood as testament to her refusal to be defined by his assessment. 18 months after founding Horizon, Aaliyah found herself facing a formidable panel of venture capitalists in a sleek Manhattan conference room. The Series A funding round represented a crucial juncture. With proper investment, Horizon could scale dramatically, but the scrutiny would be intense. "Your growth metrics are impressive, Ms. Johnson," said the lead investor, a silver-haired man who hadn't smiled once during her presentation. "But we have concerns about leadership bandwidth. As a single mother of 3, how can you guarantee the necessary commitment to drive continued expansion?" The room fell silent. Aaliyah felt, rather than saw, her CFO tense beside her, prepared for a defensive response. Instead, Aaliyah leaned forward slightly, her voice measured and confident. "Precisely because I understand the value of time and efficiency better than most executives. I've built a company generating $2 million in annual revenue with a staff of 12 while raising 3 exceptional children on my own. My ability to strategize, delegate, and execute isn't hindered by motherhood. It's been honed by it." She pulled up a slide showing Horizon's organizational structure. "We've designed our operational model specifically for scalability. Our core technology is patent pending, our client retention rate is 96%, and our expansion plan leverages existing architecture to minimize development cycles." When she finished, the lead investor's expression had transformed from skepticism to calculated interest. "Impressive perspective, Ms. Johnson. Very well. Let's discuss terms." The round closed at $15 million, valuing Horizon at $50 million, a validation that allowed Aaliyah to finally move the company to a proper office space in Lower Manhattan and expand her team to 30 employees. The investment press began to take notice, with mentions in industry publications highlighting the promising AI startup with novel approach to behavioral prediction. On the day they moved into the new office, an entire floor in a converted industrial building with views of the Brooklyn Bridge, Aaliyah brought the triplets to see their mother's expanding domain. "This is considerably more appropriate for a CEO," Ethan approved, studying the minimalist design of her corner office. "Can I play the piano in the break room?" Elijah asked, already gravitating toward the baby grand she'd installed as both inspiration and recruitment tool. Elliot, ever the strategist, studied the organizational chart on her wall. "You'll need to hire a chief operations officer soon. Your span of control is becoming inefficient." Aaliyah laughed, amazed as always by their perception. "Thank you for the executive consultation, Mr. Johnson. As Horizon expanded, so did their home. Aaliyah purchased a spacious 3-bedroom condo in a doorman building with good security and proximity to the boys' school. Though not extravagant by New York standards, it represented unimaginable luxury compared to the tiny studio where she'd once rocked 3 infants simultaneously through sleepless nights. The triplets, now approaching their 9th birthday, thrived academically and socially despite, or perhaps because of, their unusual family structure. They had developed an extraordinary independence combined with deep empathy, often helping Aaliyah manage household tasks without being asked and supporting each other's endeavors with fierce loyalty. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, as Aaliyah helped Elijah practice for an upcoming recital while simultaneously reviewing quarterly projections on her tablet, Elliot entered the living room with a business magazine. "Mom, isn't this the company you used to work for before we were born?" he asked, pointing to a feature story titled, "Tech Fusion Struggles to Maintain Edge in Competitive Market." Aaliyah froze, seeing Jonathan's face staring back from the page. He looked older, subtle lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but the same confident smile remained. The headline continued, "CEO Jonathan Pierce faces investor pressure amid innovation concerns." "Yes," she answered carefully. "I was his executive assistant many years ago." "It says they're having trouble with innovation," Ethan remarked, reading over Elliot's shoulder. "Stock down 17% year over year." Aaliyah felt a momentary urge to call former colleagues, to dig deeper into Tech Fusion's apparent struggles, to perhaps savor the poetic justice. Instead, she gently closed the magazine. "Every company faces challenges," she said neutrally. "Let's focus on our own work." Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Aaliyah allowed herself to reopen the magazine, studying Jonathan's face more carefully. There was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been present in earlier photos, a subtle strain beneath the practiced confidence. The article detailed Tech Fusion's failure to keep pace with industry developments, with analysts questioning Pierce's once visionary leadership. For a brief moment, satisfaction flickered through her, followed immediately by the realization that she felt no true pleasure in his difficulties. Her success hadn't been built on his failure. It had been constructed despite his cruelty, brick by methodical brick of her own making. As Horizon approached its 4th anniversary, the company's valuation reached $200 million after a successful Series B funding round. Aaliyah's predictive platform had revolutionized how retailers, financial institutions, and healthcare providers understood consumer behavior, earning her a coveted spot on Fortune's 40 Under 40 list of influential business leaders. The photo shoot for the magazine feature took place in Horizon's now expansive offices, occupying an entire floor in a prestigious Manhattan building. As the photographer arranged Aaliyah at her desk, the triplets watched from behind the camera crew, bursting with pride. "Chin up a bit, Ms. Johnson," directed the photographer. "Perfect. You embody successful modern leadership." The words echoed in Aaliyah's mind, a direct contradiction to Jonathan's dismissive assessment years ago. "You're common, Aaliyah, without vision. Boring people don't change the world." The final milestone of that transformative 4-year period came when Aaliyah signed the purchase agreement for their new apartment, a stunning 3-bedroom in a doorman building overlooking Central Park. As she, Elijah, Ethan, and Elliot stood in the empty living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows and herringbone hardwood floors, Aaliyah felt the weight of their journey settle into perspective. "What do you think, boys?" she asked, watching sunlight stream across the space that would become their home. "It's perfect, Mom," Elliot said simply. "The acoustics are excellent," Elijah added, testing the room with a few sung notes. "The square footage to price ratio is actually reasonable for this neighborhood," Ethan concluded after his mental calculations. Aaliyah pulled all three into a tight embrace. "We did it, boys. This is just the beginning." As they hung their first photograph on the wall of the new apartment, the 4 of them embracing in front of the Horizon logo, none of them imagined that in just 3 years, Aaliyah would be invited to a stage that would place her directly in Jonathan Pierce's path in a collision that would change both their lives forever. The photo of the 4 of them standing proudly in front of the Horizon logo became the centerpiece of their new home, a daily reminder of how far they had come. 3 years had passed since that moment, and Horizon Innovations had continued its meteoric rise, now occupying 3 full floors in the glass tower that had once seemed an impossible dream. Aaliyah, at 36, had transformed not only her company, but the entire approach to predictive analytics in multiple industries. On a crisp autumn morning, Aaliyah sat at the breakfast counter reviewing quarterly projections while the triplets, now 12, prepared for school with the practiced efficiency of children raised by a single parent who valued independence. "Mom," Elliot said, breaking the comfortable silence, "for our family history project, can I interview you about your life before us?" Aaliyah's fingers froze over her tablet. "What kind of details are you looking for?" "Where you worked? What you did?" Elliot continued, arranging his books meticulously in his backpack. "And maybe about our father?" The question hung in the air. Though the boys had occasionally asked about their father over the years, Aaliyah had always provided age-appropriate but limited information. At 12, their curiosity had grown more specific. Ethan and Elijah stopped their morning routines, clearly interested in her response. "I think we're old enough now," Ethan said, analytical as always. "The statistical norm for children knowing their paternal history is much higher than our current information level." Aaliyah placed her tablet down, giving them her full attention. "You're right. You are old enough for more details." She took a deep breath. "Let's talk properly this evening, all 4 of us." That evening, after dinner had been cleared, Aaliyah sat with her sons in their living room overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. The contrast between this moment and where she'd been 12 years ago was not lost on her. "Before you were born," she began carefully, "I worked as an executive assistant to a CEO named Jonathan Pierce at a company called Tech Fusion in Chicago." "What was he like?" Elliot asked, always the most interested in people's motivations. Aaliyah chose her words carefully. "He was ambitious, charismatic, and very focused on success." "And he's our father," Ethan stated rather than asked, his logical mind having already connected the dots from previous fragments of information. "Yes," Aaliyah confirmed. "We had a relationship that wasn't public knowledge because he was engaged to someone else. When I told him I was pregnant, he made it clear he didn't want to be involved." "He didn't want us?" Elijah asked, the emotional resonance hitting him hardest. "He wasn't ready to be a father," Aaliyah said, softening the truth. "His career was more important to him at that time." Ethan, ever the analyst, frowned. Statistically, absent fathers usually maintain some contact with their children. "Did he ever try to see us?" "No," Aaliyah answered honestly. "He made his choice very clearly." "Do we have his last name?" Elliot asked. "No, you're Johnsons like me." Elijah, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. "Does he know how we are now? That I was selected for Juilliard's pre-college program? That Ethan won the National Math Olympiad?" The question pierced Aaliyah's heart. "No, honey, he doesn't know." "Does he even know what we look like?" Elliot pressed. "I don't believe so," Aaliyah said softly. "We haven't had any contact since before you were born." The conversation continued into the evening, the boys asking increasingly detailed questions that Aaliyah answered as honestly as possible without revealing the full cruelty of Jonathan's rejection. When they finally dispersed to their rooms, she sat alone by the window, wondering if she'd handled it well, if she'd found the right balance between truth and protection. 2 weeks later, Aaliyah found herself in an entirely different conversation as a professional photographer arranged her for the cover shot of Fortune magazine's 40 Under 40 issue. The triplets watched from the sidelines, fascinated by the production involved in a major magazine cover. "Turn slightly to your right, Ms. Johnson," the photographer directed. "Perfect. You embody confident leadership." The final selected image captured Aaliyah in her element, poised, confident, with the Manhattan skyline visible through the window behind her. The cover headline read, "Aaliyah Johnson, How an Algorithm Pioneer is Reshaping the Future of Business." The accompanying profile detailed her extraordinary journey from data analyst to CEO of one of the fastest-growing AI companies in America. Carefully excluded was any mention of her struggle as a single mother of triplets, or the circumstances that had led to that situation, a deliberate choice Aaliyah had made in crafting her public narrative. The Fortune recognition opened doors that had previously remained closed. Invitations to speak at prestigious conferences flooded in, and financial news networks began requesting interviews. The triplets watched with pride as their mother appeared on CNBC one morning, discussing the future of predictive technology with the assurance of someone who had created that future. "Your algorithm has been described as revolutionary," the interviewer noted. "What drives your approach to innovation?" "I believe in looking beyond obvious patterns," Aaliyah responded smoothly. "The most valuable insights often lie in data relationships that others dismiss as insignificant. And you've built this company from scratch in just 7 years, a remarkable achievement," the host continued. "What's your secret to such rapid success?" "Focus, determination, and a talented team," Aaliyah answered, her polished response revealing nothing of the midnight coding sessions with infants sleeping nearby, the years of exhaustion, the drive born from proving someone wrong. After the interview, the producer approached her in the green room. "That was excellent. Have you considered writing a book? Your journey from analyst to industry leader would inspire many entrepreneurs." Aaliyah smiled diplomatically. "Perhaps someday, when I have more time." In truth, The complete story wasn't one she was ready to share with the world, particularly as the triplets grew older and might one day Google their mother's name. Back at Horizon's headquarters, Aaliyah retreated to her private office after a day of meetings. As her assistant summarized the next day's schedule, Aaliyah found herself drawn to her computer, opening a browser tab to search for information she normally avoided: Tech Fusion's current status. The search returned alarming headlines. Tech Fusion reports third consecutive quarter of declining revenue. Analysts question Pierce's leadership as innovation stagnates. Stock down 23% year-to-date. Aaliyah opened the investor relations page, scanning the quarterly report with the practiced eye of a seasoned executive. The numbers told a clear story. Tech Fusion was struggling to maintain relevance in a rapidly evolving technological landscape. Their core products hadn't been meaningfully updated in years, and newer offerings were failing to gain traction. A confidential meeting with her strategy team the following day confirmed what Aaliyah had begun to suspect. Tech Fusion had patents and technological infrastructure that could significantly enhance Horizon's capabilities if properly leveraged. Their innovation has stagnated, explained her chief strategy officer, pointing to a slide showing Tech Fusion's declining patent applications. But their existing IP portfolio has untapped potential that aligns with our expansion plans. Aaliyah studied the whiteboard where they'd mapped potential acquisition targets. What would be the most efficient approach? Direct acquisition would be costly and potentially hostile, her CFO advised, but a strategic minority investment through various funds, say 30%, would give us significant influence without triggering defensive measures. The team spent hours outlining a possible approach, mapping a strategy that would allow Horizon to acquire a significant stake in Tech Fusion through various investment vehicles, potentially positioning Aaliyah's company to guide, or even control, the very organization that had once discarded her. Late that evening, Aaliyah stood at her office window, contemplating the irony of the situation. 7 years ago, when she founded Horizon, revenge against Jonathan Pierce had been the furthest thing from her mind. Survival and providing for her sons had consumed all her energy. Now, potentially acquiring control of Tech Fusion would be a sound business decision regardless of personal history. Her contemplation was interrupted by a notification on her phone, an email with the subject line, "Invitation to Keynote, Illinois Technology Association Annual Gala." Aaliyah read the message twice, her pulse quickening. The association was inviting her to be the guest of honor at their annual gala in Chicago, recognizing her contributions to the field and her company's meteoric rise. Chicago, the city she had fled 12 years ago, pregnant and desperate. The city where Jonathan Pierce still presided over Tech Fusion's headquarters. The city where everything had fallen apart, and where perhaps the circle would finally close. That night, after the boys were asleep, Aaliyah sat on her balcony overlooking Central Park, considering the invitation. She had deliberately avoided Chicago all these years, building her life and company firmly in New York, away from painful memories. "Mom?" Elliot's voice came from the doorway. "Are you okay?" "Just thinking," she replied, making room for him on the outdoor sofa. "How would you boys feel about visiting Chicago? The city where you were born." Elliot's eyes lit up. "Really? We've never been there. There's an event I've been invited to. We could make a long weekend of it, see the sights." The next morning over breakfast, all 3 boys expressed enthusiasm about the trip. Elliot, ever curious, began researching Chicago attractions on his tablet. "Mom!" he exclaimed suddenly. "The Illinois Technology Association Gala. Is that what you're attending? It says here that Tech Fusion is one of the main sponsors." Aaliyah froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. In the 15 years since leaving Chicago, she had kept that city, and everything associated with her previous life, carefully separated from her present. "I didn't know that," she responded, quickly regaining her composure. "They seem to be in decline," Ethan remarked, already reading financial news about the company. Their stock has dropped 30% in the last 2 years. Classic case of corporate complacency. Innovation stagnation, Elliot agreed, scanning an analyst report. The article says the CEO, Pierce, has failed to anticipate market shifts. Aaliyah managed a slight smile. Sometimes companies lose their original vision. As she confirmed their attendance with her assistant later that morning, Aaliyah couldn't ignore the strange alignment of circumstances. The confidential acquisition strategy her team was developing, the invitation to Chicago, the triplets' growing curiosity about their origins, all converging at a moment when Jonathan Pierce's company was vulnerable and her own was ascendant. That evening, in the privacy of her bedroom, Aaliyah found herself studying recent news about Tech Fusion more carefully. Jonathan was still CEO, though rumored to be facing board pressure. His wife, Caroline Marshall Pierce, now ran the family's philanthropic foundation. They had 2 teenage daughters whose smiling faces appeared in society pages. As she closed her laptop, Aaliyah realized she felt no hatred toward him, only a distant curiosity. The Horizon team had secretly acquired, through partner investors, 30% of Tech Fusion's shares, a strategic move to absorb their underutilized patents. Jonathan didn't know it yet, but soon he would indirectly be answering to her. In her closet mirror, adjusting a golden Valentino gown for the upcoming gala, Aaliyah saw not just her reflection, but her complete journey, from desperate pregnant assistant to executive whose net worth of $200 million testified to her resilience. "We're ready," she murmured to herself, not yet knowing how literal that statement would prove in the next 24 hours. In the mirror, Aaliyah traced the delicate gold embroidery of her Valentino gown, a garment that cost more than 6 months' rent in her first Bronzeville apartment. Tomorrow she would board her company's private jet to Chicago, a city she had fled 12 years ago with nothing but determination and 3 lives growing inside her. Now she would return as a conqueror. The acquisition documents are fully prepared, her lawyer had confirmed earlier that day. Once announced, the 30% stake will give Horizon effective control over Tech Fusion's board appointments. Aaliyah opened her laptop one final time, reviewing the meticulously crafted presentation she would deliver at the gala. The slides were elegant, the narrative compelling, the story of Horizon's rise articulated with precision, and on the final slide, the announcement that would send shockwaves through the industry: Horizon Innovation's acquisition of Tech Fusion shares. What the presentation didn't include, what no corporate document could capture, was the personal journey behind the business transaction. The night she had sat among unpaid bills, a positive pregnancy test in her hand, the cruel dismissal from both Jonathan's life and her job, the years of struggle, sacrifice, and relentless work. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Mom?" Elliot's voice came from the hallway. "Can we talk about Chicago?" "Come in," she called, closing her laptop. Elliot entered, followed by his brothers. All 3 wore serious expressions that made them look startlingly adult. "We've been researching Tech Fusion," Elliot began without preamble. "They're in serious financial trouble. Their innovation pipeline has dried up completely." Ethan adjusted his glasses, tablet in hand. "Their stock has declined 43% over 3 years. Classic innovation stagnation coupled with leadership complacency." "And the CEO," Elijah added quietly. "Jonathan Pierce. He's our biological father, isn't he?" The directness of the question caught Aaliyah off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "The timeline matches," Ethan said. "You worked for him before we were born. You left Chicago when you were pregnant." "And we found photos," Elliot admitted. "The resemblance is significant." Aaliyah sank onto the edge of her bed. Of course they had figured it out. They were brilliant, curious, and had access to the internet. She had always known this day would come. "Yes," she confirmed softly. "Jonathan Pierce is your biological father." None of the boys looked surprised, merely thoughtful. "Will we see him at this gala?" Elijah asked. "Possibly. He'll likely attend as Tech Fusion's CEO. Elliot's eyes narrowed slightly. Does he know about us? That we exist? He knew I was pregnant, Aaliyah said carefully, but he chose not to be involved. And the Horizon acquisition of Tech Fusion shares, Ethan concluded. That's not a coincidence, is it? Aaliyah studied her sons' faces, so perceptive, so mature for 12. The acquisition makes perfect business sense. Their patent portfolio complements our technology roadmap. But no, the timing of announcing it at this particular gala is not entirely coincidental. To her surprise, all three boys smiled slightly. Good, Elliot said simply. The next morning, Aaliyah's team gathered in her penthouse to finalize preparations for the Chicago trip. Her assistant reviewed the itinerary while her stylist made last-minute adjustments to the golden gown. The Wall Street Journal has confirmed their interview for Saturday morning, her PR director noted. They're particularly interested in your journey as a founder and the recent $50 million funding round. Perfect, Aaliyah nodded. And the boys' schedule? A private architectural tour of the city on Saturday afternoon, followed by dinner at a Linnea. Sunday morning is open for whatever you'd like to do as a family before the return flight. Aaliyah confirmed the plans. Make sure we're traveling on the company aircraft. The boys want to see Chicago properly. After her team departed, Aaliyah found herself drawn to her bedroom closet, to a small lockbox she rarely opened. Inside lay artifacts from her previous life, her old Tech Fusion employee badge, ultrasound images of the triplets, and the 5-year plan she had written that desperate night 12 years ago. At the bottom, folded carefully, was the termination notice, clinical and impersonal, that had ended her employment 2 weeks after sharing her pregnancy news with Jonathan. The contrast between that document and her current reality was stark. Aaliyah Johnson, once dismissed as common and without vision, now commanded a company valued at over $800 million. Her innovations had transformed multiple industries. Her name appeared on patents, in business school case studies, on the covers of major magazines. In Chicago, Jonathan Pierce stared at his computer screen, frowning at Tech Fusion's latest financial projections. The quarterly numbers looked worse than expected, the third consecutive period of declining revenue. The board meeting scheduled for next week would be difficult, possibly brutal. Your 4 o'clock with the developers is starting, his assistant reminded through the intercom. Jonathan straightened his tie and practiced his confident smile, the one that had carried him through increasingly tense investor meetings. At 52, he remained handsome, though stress had added silver to his temples and lines around his eyes. The weight of maintaining the appearance of success had become exhausting. In his spacious corner office overlooking Lake Michigan, Jonathan tried to project optimism as his product team explained the latest delays in their software release. We're facing unexpected integration challenges, the lead developer explained apologetically. We need at least another month. We don't have another month, Jonathan snapped, his facade cracking. The Marshall Group is already questioning their continued investment. After the team departed, Caroline called, her voice tight with controlled irritation. Don't forget the dinner with my parents tonight. Dad wants updates on the company's strategy. I'll be there, Jonathan promised, loosening his tie as anxiety tightened his chest. The Marshall connection, his in-laws, his wife, their investment, had been the foundation of his success for 15 years. Now that foundation was showing dangerous cracks. That evening, Jonathan maintained a carefully calibrated performance at his in-laws' lakefront mansion. Caroline watched him critically as he outlined Tech Fusion's visionary roadmap to her father, promises that sounded increasingly hollow even to his own ears. The Technology Association Gala will be a perfect platform to announce our new direction, Jonathan assured his father-in-law. We've invited all the major industry players and press. What he didn't mention was that Tech Fusion had been downgraded from headline sponsor to supporting partner this year, a humiliating reflection of their diminished industry standing. Back at their own Gold Coast home, Caroline confronted him in their bedroom. My father isn't stupid, Jonathan. He knows something's wrong with the company. Everything's under control, Jonathan insisted, the lie automatic after months of repetition. We're in a transition phase. You've been saying that for 2 years, Caroline replied coldly. The girls' trust funds are tied to Tech Fusion stock, which has lost nearly half its value since they were born. As his wife continued her critique, Jonathan's mind drifted to the upcoming gala. He needed to project absolute confidence, to charm investors and journalists into believing Tech Fusion remained the industry leader it had once been. His entire carefully constructed life depended on maintaining that illusion. In New York, Aaliyah supervised as the triplets packed for their first visit to Chicago. Each boy approached the task differently. Ethan, with mathematical precision, folding clothes into perfect rectangles, Elijah arranging items by color, Elliot creating logical groupings based on daily activities. "Will we have time to visit where we were born?" Elliot asked. "If you want," Aaliyah replied, surprised by the request, "though the hospital isn't particularly interesting." "It's historically significant to us," Ethan explained seriously. "The point of origin." Aaliyah smiled, struck once again by their unique perspectives. "Then we'll make time." That night, unable to sleep, Aaliyah found herself reading recent articles about Jonathan Pierce. His company was struggling, but he continued to present himself as a visionary leader in industry publications. A recent profile included photos of him with Caroline and their 2 daughters at a charity gala. The perfect executive family. For a moment, Aaliyah allowed herself to imagine the confrontation to come. Would he recognize her immediately? Would he notice the boys, so clearly carrying his features, his eyes? What would cross his face when she announced Horizon's acquisition of Tech Fusion shares from the gala podium? The satisfaction she had anticipated feeling remained elusive. Instead, Aaliyah recognized a more complex emotion, not the triumph of revenge but the completion of a circle. This was not about destroying Jonathan Pierce, it was about finally closing a chapter that had been left painfully open. The morning of their departure dawned clear and bright. As the car arrived to take them to the airport, Aaliyah watched her sons, tall, confident, impeccably dressed in matching navy blazers, and felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. These extraordinary young men were her true success, far more significant than any business achievement. At the private terminal, the Horizon corporate jet waited on the tarmac. As they boarded, Elliot turned to his mother with a question that revealed he had been contemplating their situation deeply. "Mom, after the gala, after he knows about us, what happens then?" "That depends partly on him," Aaliyah answered honestly, "and partly on what you 3 want." "I'm not sure I want anything from him," Elijah said quietly. "We've done fine without him." "We should maintain strategic ambiguity until we assess his reaction," Ethan suggested pragmatically. Aaliyah smiled at their responses, so different, yet each perfectly reflecting their personalities. "We'll navigate it together, whatever happens." As the jet accelerated down the runway, Aaliyah gazed out the window at the receding Manhattan skyline. 12 years of building, growing, proving, all leading to this moment of return. In her briefcase lay the acquisition documents, the speech that would announce Horizon's control of Tech Fusion, the culmination of a journey that had begun with 3 heartbeats inside her and a determination to prove one man wrong. On the morning of departure to Chicago, as the 4 of them boarded the private jet, none could have predicted that in exactly 36 hours, the DNA of the triplets would no longer be a secret kept, and the empire carefully built by Jonathan Pierce would begin to crumble before his very eyes. The Drake Hotel glittered under the meticulously arranged lighting of the Illinois Technology Association annual gala. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic reflections across the grand ballroom, where Chicago's technological elite mingled in a carefully choreographed dance of networking and status signaling. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in designer gowns clustered in strategic groupings, champagne flutes in hand, each conversation a potential business opportunity. Jonathan Pierce adjusted his bow tie for the third time in 5 minutes, his fingers betraying the nervousness his face refused to show. 15 years as TechFusion's CEO had added distinguished silver streaks to his temples and fine lines around his eyes, markers of experience that normally projected authority but tonight seemed more like evidence of strain. As I was saying, Jonathan continued, addressing 3 major shareholders who had cornered him near the bar. Our next quarter will bring some surprising results. We have several innovations nearly ready for announcement that will reposition us at the forefront of... His voice trailed off as a palpable shift rippled through the ballroom. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the grand entrance. Like a scene from a film, the crowd seemed to part instinctively, creating an unplanned pathway from the doorway. Jonathan followed the collective gaze, and the whiskey glass nearly slipped from his suddenly numb fingers. Aaliyah Johnson stood in the entrance, a vision in a golden Valentino gown that captured light like liquid mercury. Her posture radiated quiet confidence, her skin glowing under the chandelier light, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that highlighted her graceful neck and diamond earrings. But what caused Jonathan's breath to catch painfully in his throat were the 3 young men flanking her. Identical triplets in impeccably tailored tuxedos, with warm brown skin and bearing themselves with remarkable poise for teenagers. Their features were hauntingly familiar: strong jawlines, the same confident stance, the same height and build at 14 that Jonathan himself had possessed at that age. But it was their eyes that sent a jolt of recognition through him like an electric current. Piercing green eyes, unmistakably his own, looking out from 3 faces that were undeniably the perfect genetic blend of himself and Aaliyah. "Excuse me," Jonathan mumbled to the shareholders, setting down his glass with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. He retreated toward a less crowded corner, needing space to process the shock. For the next hour, Jonathan watched from a careful distance as Aaliyah navigated the gala with masterful grace. Industry leaders and investors gravitated toward her naturally, their body language revealing a deference typically reserved for the most powerful players in the room. The triplets moved alongside her with remarkable sophistication, articulate and engaging as they conversed with executives 3 times their age. The murmured conversations around Jonathan became impossible to ignore. That's Aaliyah Johnson, CEO of Horizon Innovations, revolutionary AI predictive platform, just closed a $50 million funding round at an $800 million valuation. Those are her sons, triplets, all academic prodigies. The pianist is already at Juilliard pre-college. Mathematician won the National Olympiad. Youngest debate team captain in Dalton history. Jonathan drained his second whiskey, the burn in his throat nothing compared to the acid churning in his stomach. The pieces were assembling themselves in his mind. Aaliyah, pregnant 15 years ago, triplets who appeared to be 14, the unmistakable resemblance, sons he had never known existed. When fate finally forced their paths to cross at the bar, the world around them seemed to slow down. Jonathan had just ordered another drink when he sensed her presence beside him. The familiar scent of her perfume, more expensive now but with the same bass notes, hit him before he turned. "Aaliyah," he managed, his voice betraying more emotion than he'd intended. "Jonathan," she replied, her tone perfectly modulated, neither warm nor cold. "How long it's been?" He struggled to reconcile the woman before him with the assistant he'd discarded 15 years ago. This Aaliyah carried herself with the assured confidence of someone who commanded rooms rather than served in them. Her skin glowed with health and success. Even her voice had changed, lower, more authoritative, without the eager-to-please cadence he remembered. "I didn't know you would be here," he said, searching for solid conversational ground. "You look different." 15 years tend to do that to a person. She accepted a champagne flute from the bartender with a gracious nod. "You, on the other hand, look exactly as I remember." The comment carried layers of meaning that made Jonathan shift uncomfortably. Before he could formulate a response, the three teenagers approached, moving with the coordinated efficiency of those accustomed to functioning as a unit. "Mother," said one of them, the one wearing a subtle musical note pin on his lapel. "Mr. Hastings from Venture Capital Partners would like to discuss potential synergies with the European division." Jonathan couldn't help staring. The boy's diction was precise, confident, his posture perfect. Standing together, the resemblance between the triplets and himself was undeniable. His jawline, his eyebrows, even the way they held their hands. Yet there was something in their bearing that was entirely different from his adolescent self, a grounded assurance he hadn't developed until much later in life. "Jonathan," Aaliyah said with a calculated smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "meet Elijah, Ethan, and Elliot Johnson, my sons." The triplets extended their hands in practiced succession, no recognition whatsoever in their green eyes, his eyes. To them, he was merely another executive in a sea of interchangeable corporate faces. "It's a pleasure," Jonathan stammered, shaking each hand mechanically, noting the firm, confident grip of each boy. "You're triplets." "Yes, sir," responded the one wearing glasses. Ethan, he assumed. Identical, technically, though most people can tell us apart after minimal interaction. "Do you work in technology as well?" asked the third, Elliot, with polite interest. "He's the CEO of Tech Fusion," Aaliyah explained, watching carefully as recognition dawned in her son's eyes. Not of the man, but of the company they had researched. "A company I knew quite well, many years ago." "Tech Fusion?" Ethan asked, interest flickering in his expression. "I read about your company recently. You're facing significant challenges with innovation, aren't you? Stock down 30% over the past 2 years seems concerning." Jonathan felt blood drain from his face. "We're undergoing a strategic transitional phase." "Fascinating," Aaliyah commented with the barest hint of satisfaction. "Boys, why don't you speak with Mr. Hastings while I catch up with Mr. Pierce? Old business matters." When the young men departed with respectful nods, the veneer of civility between the former lovers evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. "They're my sons," Jonathan whispered urgently, voice tight with shock. "Biologically speaking, yes," Aaliyah replied evenly. "In every other aspect that matters, no. Why did you never tell me they were triplets? Why hide them from me all these years?" Aaliyah's laugh held no humor. "Hide? You fired me when you learned about the pregnancy, called me common, worthless, said I'd never be more than a glorified assistant. Remember?" "I was scared under pressure," Jonathan protested, his words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "The marriage to Caroline was crucial for your ambition. Yes, I understand perfectly." She took a deliberate sip of champagne. "Curiously, while you've been busy being CEO of the same company for 15 years, I built a technology empire from nothing. Ironic, isn't it?" Before Jonathan could respond, the association president took the stage, tapping a microphone to gather attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president announced with practiced enthusiasm, "it is my great honor to introduce our special guest tonight, a visionary whose inspiring journey has taken her from junior analyst to CEO of a company valued at over $800 million. Please welcome Aaliyah Johnson." The ballroom erupted in enthusiastic applause. Jonathan watched, paralyzed, as Aaliyah glided confidently to the stage. The triplets, his sons, applauded proudly from the front row, their profiles striking in their resemblance to his own. "Thank you for this recognition," Aaliyah began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the room. "My journey began right here in Chicago, though not in the way many might imagine. 15 years ago, I was a pregnant, unemployed executive assistant, abandoned without resources or support." Silence fell over the ballroom. In the audience, Jonathan felt curious gazes shifting between him and the stage, the connection dawning on faces throughout the room. "Today, I'm pleased to announce that Horizon Innovations has recently acquired 30% of Tech Fusion Corporation shares," Aaliyah continued, prompting surprised murmurs throughout the hall. "Our first order of business will be a complete restructuring of the executive leadership, beginning at the top." Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face as camera flashes captured the exact moment his world collapsed around him. From the stage, Aaliyah's eyes met his briefly, not with hatred or triumph, but with the calm certainty of someone who had completed a long journey and found themselves exactly where they were meant to be. While the flashes of cameras captured the moment of his public undoing, Jonathan realized with crushing clarity that the assistant he had once dismissed as common and without vision had not only eclipsed his success, but had done so while raising 3 extraordinary sons who carried his blood, but who had never needed his name. The flashes of cameras continued long after Aaliyah left the stage, capturing the stunned expressions across the ballroom and Jonathan's ashen face as he retreated toward the exit. The damage control would begin tomorrow, but tonight, the headlines were already writing themselves. Morning light filtered through the hotel suite's curtains as Aaliyah reviewed the cascade of notifications on her phone. Headlines blazed across financial and technology news sites. Tech Fusion's CEO blindsided by hostile takeover. Johnson exposes former boss who fired her while pregnant. Fall of a titan. Pierce loses company and discovers triplets on the same day. Aaliyah set her phone aside as her PR director called, voice animated with barely contained excitement. "The business press is going wild. The Wall Street Journal is requesting an exclusive interview and CNBC wants you live this afternoon. This couldn't have gone better if we'd scripted it. Hold all interviews until tomorrow," Aaliyah replied calmly. "Today belongs to the boys." After ending the call, she found the triplets in the suite's dining area, already dressed and reviewing news reports on their tablets. Each wore an expression that blended curiosity with analytical detachment, watching the corporate and personal drama unfold with the perspective of observers rather than participants. "How are you 3 feeling?" Aaliyah asked, pouring herself coffee from the silver carafe. "It's strange," Elliot admitted, the natural spokesperson for the group. Seeing him in person was different than just knowing he existed. "He looked shocked," Elijah observed quietly. "Not angry, just completely blindsided." His pupillary dilation and micro-expressions indicated genuine surprise, Ethan added, adjusting his glasses. "He truly had no idea about us." Before Aaliyah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from the hotel concierge. "Mr. Jonathan Pierce requesting to see you, currently in the lobby." Across town in the gleaming downtown headquarters of Tech Fusion, the emergency board meeting had been underway for nearly an hour. The conference room, usually a place of measured corporate dialogue, now crackled with tension and barely controlled panic. "The shareholders are in complete disarray," the chief financial officer reported, pointing to real-time stock trackers on the wall screen. "We're down 15% just this morning." Jonathan sat at the head of the table, tie loosened, the perfect corporate facade crumbling visibly with each update. The board members, once his supporters, now potential executioners, watched him with expressions ranging from sympathy to barely disguised contempt. "This is absurd," Jonathan protested, gesturing at the presentation outlining Horizon's stake in the company. "She can't simply arrive and take control." The company's legal counsel cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Technically, Mr. Pierce, she can. The acquisition was completely legal, executed through various investment funds. Given our performance over the past 3 years." He left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging heavy in the air. "And there's the matter of the personal circumstances," added Victoria Stevens, the longest-serving board member, choosing her words carefully. "The ethical implications of terminating an employee during pregnancy, especially considering—" "Considering what?" Jonathan challenged, a dangerous edge to his voice. Victoria met his gaze directly. "Considering that it now appears obvious to everyone that her children are yours. Social media is flooded with comparison photos. The resemblance is undeniable." Jonathan slumped back in his chair, the fight draining from him as quickly as it had flared. The faces around the table reflected the unspoken reality. His position was untenable. Beyond the business catastrophe lay a personal scandal that threatened everything he had built. "We need to announce your temporary leave of absence by end of day," the PR director stated, not unkindly. "For personal reasons." In the Drake Hotel's presidential suite, Aaliyah sat opposite her 3 sons on matching cream-colored sofas, their expressions serious as she contemplated Jonathan's request to see them. "I believe you're old enough to make this decision yourselves," she said carefully. "He's asked to speak with all of us. I'll respect whatever you choose." The triplets exchanged glances, the subtle, nearly telepathic communication they had developed since infancy. Elliot, as usual, spoke first after their silent conference. "We should hear what he has to say," he concluded pragmatically. "Avoiding him won't make the situation less complex." "I'm curious," Ethan admitted, analytical as always. His responses could be informative. Elijah, typically the most emotionally intuitive, nodded slowly. "I think we need to see him. Not for his sake, but for ours." Aaliyah studied their faces, so young yet remarkably mature, forced to navigate a situation no 14-year-old should face. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "I'll have him sent up." When Jonathan Pierce stepped into the suite 20 minutes later, the contrast between his current dishevelment and Aaliyah's composed elegance was striking. His bespoke suit, impeccable the previous evening, now looked slept in. His eyes were shadowed by exhaustion, his customary confidence replaced by uncertain hesitation. "Thank you for seeing me," he began awkwardly, standing near the door as if unsure of his welcome. "Please sit." Aaliyah indicated the sofa opposite where she and the triplets were seated, a united front. Jonathan lowered himself carefully, eyes continuously drawn to the 3 teenagers, mirror images of each other with unmistakable echoes of his own features. In daylight, the resemblance was even more pronounced. The shape of their eyes, the set of their jaws, even certain mannerisms as they observed him. There's so much I need to say," he began nervously. "So many years lost." "We didn't come here for a family reunion," Aaliyah stated coolly. "The boys have agreed to listen to what you have to say. A courtesy." For the next hour, Jonathan attempted desperately to explain his past actions, the corporate pressure, the fear of scandal, his immaturity and selfishness. With increasing desperation, he offered financial support, promised to make up for lost time, spoke of inheritance rights and family legacy. As he talked, the triplets listened with inscrutable expressions, occasionally exchanging glances but offering no response. Finally, Elliot raised his hand slightly, interrupting Jonathan's increasingly circular monologue. "Mr. Pierce," he said, his tone formal and measured, "I appreciate your candor, but I feel I should clarify something. We aren't a charity project or a redemption opportunity for you. We've grown up with everything we needed," Elijah added quietly. "Our mother ensured that." "And regarding inheritance," Ethan continued with practical precision, "public financial reports suggest our mother's net worth significantly exceeds yours, so that concern seems redundant." Jonathan stared at the 3 teenagers, articulate, confident, unimpressed by his status or wealth. In their faces, he saw not only his own features but Aaliyah's strength and determination, a strength he had never recognized until it was far too late. "I understand," he said finally, genuine regret coloring his voice for perhaps the first time. "Could I at least get to know you? With time?" Aaliyah intervened gently. "That decision belongs to them, not me. They're 14, not 4. I'll respect whatever they choose." The days following the gala brought a media storm of unprecedented intensity. Jonathan watched helplessly as his carefully constructed life crumbled piece by piece. Caroline demanded explanations he couldn't adequately provide, her cold fury more devastating than screaming would have been. His daughters, aged 12 and 10, looked at him with newfound confusion and disappointment, their understanding of their father permanently altered. Triplets? Caroline had hissed, pacing their bedroom after reading the third exposé. You have 3 teenage sons you never bothered to mention? Were you planning to surprise me with this information at some point in our 15-year marriage? The Tech Fusion board announced his indefinite leave of absence with clinical corporate language that thinly veiled his effective termination. 15 years as CEO ended with a press release that took less than 5 minutes to read. 1 week after the gala, Jonathan stood on the sidewalk outside Midway Airport, watching as Horizon Innovations' private jet taxied toward the runway. Through the fence, he could make out the sleek white aircraft with its distinctive blue Horizon Line logo, the symbol of Alia's success and his failure. The triplets had agreed to occasional contact, emails, perhaps video calls eventually, but had made clear they felt no need for a father in their lives. Not from anger or resentment, they had explained with disconcerting maturity, but simply because they had thrived without him. "We have an excellent mother," Ethan had stated matter-of-factly. "Our development has been optimal without paternal involvement." In his emptied office at Tech Fusion headquarters, Jonathan contemplated the cruel irony. For 15 years he had run the same company, accumulated considerable wealth, built a respectable reputation, and in a single night he had discovered that Alia, the woman he had considered common and without potential, had not only surpassed him professionally, but raised 3 extraordinary sons who carried his blood but didn't need his name. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Horizon's Manhattan headquarters as Alia reviewed the quarterly reports on her tablet. A week had passed since the explosive confrontation in Chicago, and the business world was still buzzing with the story of Tech Fusion's acquisition and the revelation of Jonathan Pierce's secret children. The media had constructed a narrative more dramatic than any fiction: the abandoned pregnant assistant who rose to become a billionaire CEO, returning to claim her former employer's company while revealing her triplet sons to their biological father. "The Wall Street Journal interview is confirmed for 10 o'clock, her assistant noted, reviewing the day's schedule. They're particularly interested in the integration plans for Tech Fusion's patent portfolio." Alia nodded, still processing the events of the past week. The aftermath had been both simpler and more complex than she had anticipated. The business transition was proceeding smoothly. Markets had responded favorably to Horizon's acquisition once the initial shock subsided. The personal aftermath, however, remained uncharted territory. Her phone chimed with a notification, an email from Jonathan, the 3rd this week. Unlike his previous messages, which had alternated between desperate pleas and thinly veiled attempts to reassert control, this one was different. Brief, direct, almost humble. "I've accepted the board's severance package. The transition team has my full cooperation. I owe you and the boys at least that much." Alia set her phone down without responding. The victory she had imagined for so many years felt hollow now that it had arrived. Not because she regretted her actions, but because the man whose approval she had once desperately sought now seemed diminished, almost irrelevant to her life's trajectory. The triplets entered her office, their school day finished, each carrying their respective symbols of achievement: Elijah with sheet music marked with his professor's approving comments, Ethan with a mathematics competition medal, Elliot with debate team notes. "How was your day?" Alia asked, setting aside work to focus entirely on them. "Jonathan emailed us," Elliot stated without preamble. "Individually, separate messages." Alia maintained her neutral expression. "You're old enough to decide how to handle that. What are you thinking?" His message was surprisingly self-aware, Ethan observed, analytical as always. He acknowledged his absence was his failure, not our deficiency. "He mentioned wanting to know us, but said he'd respect our boundaries," Elijah added, his emotional intelligence detecting nuances the others might miss. Alia studied their faces, so similar in appearance yet so distinct in character. "And how do you feel about that?" Elliot, the natural spokesman, shrugged slightly. "We discussed it. We're thinking perhaps limited email contact initially. See if he's genuine." That seems like a measured approach, Aaliyah agreed, proud of their maturity. As they settled into discussing their school day, Aaliyah's thoughts drifted to the past week's revelations. The confrontation in Chicago had been just the beginning. What followed was a comprehensive restructuring of both Tech Fusion's leadership and her relationship with the past that had driven her for so long. In Chicago, Jonathan Pierce stood in his half-emptied office, boxing personal items under the watchful eye of a human resources representative, standard procedure for departing executives. The indignity of it burned, yet seemed fitting somehow. 15 years ago, Aaliyah had cleared her desk under similar supervision. His phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "The girls have questions about their half-brothers. We need to talk when you're finished there." The family fallout had been swift and severe. Caroline had moved with their daughters to her parents' Lake Forest estate temporarily, though the hastily retained divorce attorney suggested the arrangement might become permanent. His daughters, initially confused, now alternated between curiosity about their newly discovered half-siblings and anger at their father's deception. As Jonathan placed his industry awards in a cardboard box, his gaze fell on a framed magazine cover from 10 years earlier, his face beneath the headline, "Visionary Leadership, Pierce Transforms Tech Fusion." The irony wasn't lost on him. The visionary had failed to see what was directly before him, both Aaliyah's potential and his company's gradual decline. 3 days later, Aaliyah convened a virtual meeting with Tech Fusion's remaining executive team. The faces on her screen ranged from anxious to cautiously optimistic as she outlined the integration strategy. "Horizon isn't looking to dismantle Tech Fusion," she explained calmly. "We're interested in revitalizing it. Your patent portfolio and technical talent are underutilized assets that align with our growth strategy." One executive, braver than the others, asked the question lingering in everyone's mind. "And the former CEO's role going forward?" Aaliyah's response surprised even her own team. "Jonathan Pierce has valuable institutional knowledge and industry relationships. If he's willing to work within the new structure, we'd consider a senior advisory position." Later that evening, over dinner with Sandra Williams, her original mentor who had flown in from Chicago to celebrate Aaliyah's triumph, she explained her unexpected decision. "You're offering him a position?" Sandra asked incredulously. "After everything?" Aaliyah sipped her wine thoughtfully. "The revenge I imagined for so long doesn't feel satisfying now that it's within reach. Perpetuating cycles of destruction doesn't benefit anyone. Not the companies, not me, and certainly not the boys." Sandra studied her former protégé with newfound respect. "You've truly outgrown him in every way that matters." 2 weeks after the gala, the triplets gathered in Horizon's conference room, preparing to announce the Horizon Mentorship Program, their idea to support single mothers interested in technology careers. The initiative would provide education, childcare, and professional networking for women facing circumstances similar to what Aaliyah had encountered 14 years earlier. "We've allocated $5 million from the Horizon Foundation for the initial phase," Elliott explained to the assembled staff and press. "Our goal is to support 50 women in the first year." As he outlined the program's details, Aaliyah watched from the side of the room, her heart swelling with pride. These young men, barely 14, already understood what had taken her years to fully grasp. That success was meaningful not just as personal triumph, but as a platform to create opportunity for others. "Our mother taught us that true success isn't about revenge," Elliott concluded, his poise remarkable for his age. "It's about building something meaningful from whatever circumstances you're given." That evening, Aaliyah found herself alone in her office reviewing old documents. In a drawer she rarely opened lay the worn notebook containing her original 5-year plan, the one created that desperate night when 3 lives depended on her ability to rise from devastation. The pages were filled with goals once considered wildly ambitious: own apartment in safe neighborhood, management position, 6-figure salary. Reality had far exceeded those initial dreams, from homeless shelter contingency plans to owning multiple properties. from desperate job applications to commanding a company valued at nearly $1 billion, from fearing she couldn't provide for her sons to watching them thrive beyond her wildest hopes. Her phone chimed with an email notification. Jonathan had accepted the advisory role, his message professional but with an undercurrent of genuine gratitude. The triplets had responded to his individual emails with cautious openness, establishing clear boundaries but not rejecting the possibility of relationship. The following weekend, Aaliyah made an unexpected pilgrimage to Chicago, leaving the boys in New York with plans to join their debate team's competition. Her car pulled up before her old apartment building in Bronzeville, the dilapidated structure where she had lived during her most desperate months. "Ms. Johnson?" The real estate agent looked confused. "You're interested in purchasing this building? It's hardly the type of investment someone of your profile typically considers." "I have personal reasons," Aaliyah explained simply, signing the purchase offer without haggling over the price. Her plan was already forming: renovate the building into subsidized housing for single parents with an on-site childcare center and technology learning lab, a transformation of the place that had witnessed her darkest days into a launching pad for others facing similar struggles. In the small courtyard behind the building, Aaliyah arranged for the planting of 3 oak saplings in a perfect triangle. "One for each of you," she explained to the boys via video call, "to mark where we began." Back in Manhattan that evening, Aaliyah hosted a small dinner in their apartment, just the 4 of them celebrating not just the business success of the past week, but the emotional journey completed. As they sat around the table that had once seemed an impossible luxury, Elliot raised his glass. "To Mom," he said simply, "for showing us what real strength looks like." Aaliyah looked at her sons, these extraordinary young men who carried Jonathan's features but her spirit, and felt the final weight of the past lift from her shoulders. The circle was complete. The abandoned assistant had not only survived but thrived, creating a legacy that would extend far beyond corporate success. 15 years after that cold night in Chicago, when a pregnant and abandoned assistant had promised to prove her worth, Aaliyah Johnson had not only built a technology empire and raised 3 extraordinary sons, but finally understood the most valuable lesson of all: that true victory wasn't in becoming powerful enough to destroy her enemies, but in becoming wise enough to break the cycle of destruction completely. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.